Good afternoon and welcome to Governing AI Data Flows, Strategies for Securely Enabling Clinicians, a health system CIO production sponsored by Netskope. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. My name is Anthony Guerra. I'm the founder and editor of healthsystemCIO, and I'll be your moderator today. We're looking forward to your participation. You can send in your questions or comments at any time in the Q&A box, and we'll address those later in the session. Just so you see how we're going to spend our time today, first we're going to go about 35-40 minutes with our main panel discussion featuring Anahi Santiago, CISO with ChristianaCare, Krista Arndt, Associate CISO at St. Luke's University Health Network, and Robert Butler, Director of Information Security with Netskope. And then we will get to our Q&A. So let's jump right in. Anahi, let's start with you. You want to give us a little information about your organization and your role?
Sure. So, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation. I'm Anahi Santiago. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for ChristianaCare. ChristianaCare is the largest health system and employer in the state of Delaware, with hospitals and facilities in Delaware, Maryland, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania.
Excellent. Very good. Thank you. Krista?
Sure. My name is Krista Arndt. I'm the Associate CISO at St. Luke's University Health Network. And St. Luke's, I like to lead with a couple facts because you can look this stuff up, but we're about 26,000 employees, 16 hospital campuses, over 350 ambulatory sites. And we just won top quality marks again this year nationally ahead of Houston Methodist and Mayo Clinic. So we're a leading hospital system and health network in the Lehigh Valley, and we also have a really big educational presence.
Excellent. Very good. Robert?
Name is Rob Butler. Manage a couple of different teams here at Netskope, the Security Operations Center. Of course, we're responding to AI alerts and all that kind of good stuff. And our Customer Zero team, which is we focus on using Netskope in all of its capacities possible to defend our own company and our own data. And it's just an interesting tidbit. I was introduced to Netskope while working at a healthcare organization a little over 10 years ago. So kind of coming back full circle.
Excellent. Very good, Rob. Thank you for that. All right, let's jump right in. What is your biggest concern regarding AI adoption today? It's kind of a general question, but we'll see where you want to take it from there. Anahi?
Uh, so my biggest concern is lack of visibility. And what I mean by that is, we've had for the last couple of years pretty good governance process where if our organization wants to onboard some type of technology that's going to leverage AI, they they need to go through the typical risk assessment, not just security, but AI risk assessment, which takes into account clinical risk, financial risk, organizational risk, in addition to security. And from there, we make decisions as to whether to adopt the technology. That being said, I recognize that our vendors who have not traditionally employed AI into their technologies are now doing so at a pretty active pace. And we have no way of governing their ability to do so. We didn't have language in our contracts 3 years ago prohibiting or requiring vendors from notifying us if they were going to introduce AI functionality. So we may or may not have a slew of AI functionality running on our network that we don't know anything about. And so I've spent considerable amount of time looking at technologies that can enable us to get the kind of visibility that I'm looking for. In fact, one of them may be on this call. And I just think it's a priority. So, before I go down the path of worrying about agents and other things, I really just need to start with the basics, which is knowing what's running on our network so that we know how to govern it.
Excellent. Very good. Krista?
Yeah, I would say that's a top concern for us too. We have invested our time very heavily in doing an analysis and making sure we at least have visibility over the identities and the identity portion, because when it comes down to it, like what is AI? It is just an identity or a bunch of code being controlled by language models, which is another bunch of code. Something other to put on the radar is going to be guardrails on it. I know with Anahi, I'm with you, right? Because we have a ton of legacy vendor contracts, and positively, we've tried to center our strategy around trusted vendors that we can control and are powerful, and we have partnerships with. But yeah, the shadow IT, it's a problem with everybody, right? Like, and now it becomes a larger problem, and just trying to figure out how to secure what we don't know and to get visibility into what we don't know is going on.
All right, very good. Robert?
Echo, same sentiment on a couple of those. Definitely just, one of the big things is where's our data going? When we're talking, adoption of AI, do we still control, the data when it goes in, comes out? Is it still ours? Where does that governance lie? And just making sure that we can, just like Krista said, keep the guardrails around it. It's definitely been one of our main concerns.
And we've been joined by Antonio Davis with Northeast Georgia Health System. Antonio, thanks for joining. So, we started with a broad question of just your biggest concerns regarding AI adoption. So, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think initially because we're still in the early stages of AI adoption, and can you hear me? Okay.
I can. Yep.
Okay. Perfect. Because we're really kind of still in the early stages, even though we've adopted some AI capabilities to support our clinical workflows and so forth. I think our biggest concern is really just getting accountability for all the AI that's running in our environment, right? So, we've standardized on Microsoft Copilot as our Gen AI, kind of standard. But there are a number of Gen AI apps that are running in the environment right now. So, the shadow AI is a real problem. Understanding what use cases those AIs are, trying to resolve for our user base is important, and then trying to move more towards a standardized posture using copilots. All right, we're also in the mix of adopting capabilities that's going to give us the ability to establish those guardrails that everyone was talking about, right? In accordance with our AI acceptable use policies, and give us kind of visibility into what users or what AI is actually accessing in the environment too, because data security, data governance is a huge issue as well. The potential for data leakage and data loss is a huge risk. So we're trying to get visibility into those things too. So we have a number of incumbent vendors that are obviously incorporated AI capabilities into their tools, and we're going through a process of really kind of evaluating what those AI capabilities might gain for us. All right, in terms of giving us the guardrails, establishing essentially an AI gateway, the ability to monitor AI traffic north, south, and east, west. All those things are top of mind for us.
Very good. So let's go into the idea of policies first. So the way I'm thinking about it is, first we have to figure out what our policies are. There were three stories I did yesterday about industry bodies coming out with frameworks. Everybody's coming out with frameworks now. Everybody's trying to help because they say it's the Wild West. So there's industry associations coming out with frameworks and guardrails, and kind of, I think they're to help build your policies. Um, does it make sense, Krista, that we have to start with a policy? We have to start with saying what we're going to allow here and what we're not. The way I think of it is that's sort of step one. And then Antonio mentioned sort of different tools, right? So we first we decide what people can do, then we figure out how to figure out what they are doing, right? And then we can work on enforcement when they're operating outside the policy. We need to decide what they can do, and then have visibility into what they're actually doing. And another thing that we can talk about, which Antonio mentioned, and this came up in an interview I did the other day, was really leveraging the knowledge of what's going on around shadow AI, meaning they're using this stuff for a reason. They're trying to take care of patients. So let's leverage the knowledge that we've been given by finding out what they're using to see if we can give it to them in a sanctioned way. If so
Right.
they're doing it for a reason. So Krista, wherever you want to take that.
Yeah, I'll say you're absolutely on the right track. One of the things that we are managing right now as security practitioners are the plethora of young frameworks that are coming out. And so typically when you build a security program, you're obviously going to start with it's administrative, technical, and physical controls, right? And then you cover the control plane layers. But the problem we're coming out with is they are just now, and when I say they, I mean governing bodies in general. Other than OWASP has had something out, and NIST has had guidance out for a while, but it's not an actual framework with stuff that is left up to a lot of interpretation. So the approach that we took is you understand the traditional controls that do apply to AI and cover your traditional controls, and make sure that your house is in order there. And then you start to understand what are the non-traditional controls that are specific to AI, like the guardrails that you have to put around them, such as we need semantic DLP, right? Like, so DLP, you can't wholly use traditional controls, and that's just one example. You need oh my God, I have a whole thing on this, like a central control plane layer, like some other stuff that you typically wouldn't have for your security program. And so you then try to augment with technical controls. And so, that's known to everybody. It's just there's so much guidance out there, and there isn't a formal approved framework from a national body yet, although they're very close. So you make a really good point, and everybody on here with, okay, how do we shadow AI to our advantage? And truthfully, it comes from two different fronts. Our CIO has done a phenomenal job with educating our physicians, our clinical practitioners, our administrators as to what our strategy is here of using trusted partners. So they are more likely to look at the tools that they do know exist and that they are very familiar with using versus looking outside. And then we use some monitoring capabilities that we currently have. We're a big design partner with Microsoft to monitor for, the prevalence of hitting certain sites and if they hit on tags that are AI. But we also use very restrictive controls from an AI perspective, where we're essentially blocking everything other than what is approved, and allowing piecemeal until we get better controls beyond that to cover the non-traditional security risks around AI. So yeah, I mean, I think our CIO has done a phenomenal job with saying, like, okay, security, you're a partner. Like, let's figure out what people are trying to use and figure out if it's something we already have and it's through education, or if we truly need to invest in a new technology. I think it's like any technology. You want to centralize your stack based on your use case, like exploit everything Epic has, right? Like, why are you going to go and piecemeal controls and then increase the cost of your infrastructure, your cost of maintenance, and then increase the risk of people, using 40 different things because they don't know any better.
Very good. Anahi? Nope, you're on mute. Anahi, you're on mute. There you go. Start over. I'm sure it was good stuff. Drop it again.
Had happened.
I
So
know.
we've taken a little bit of a different approach in terms of, yes, we started with the policy, and then we moved into assessing where we needed to implement technical controls to align with the policy, and then educate, educate, educate. But our methodology and our approach has been open it up. Let's see what people are using through our cloud access security broker and our web security gateway, and via there identify what the appropriate use cases are to move to enterprise platforms, and where we see potentially risky behavior. We've coupled that with our data loss prevention tooling, such that we now, if you go to an AI website, you get the little CASB window that tells you, here's the policy, go click it, accept, and then you're able to move on to the AI sites. But if you try to interact with it, and you trigger a conditional access policy, or you trigger a privacy policy where you're trying to interact with the tool with sensitive data, we block it. And we put a little message there that states, you're doing something against policy, please contact the security team. And we proactively review what people are trying to do that hits those policy blocks. And what we're learning is that people just don't know any better. They don't know that they can use Copilot. They didn't know that after the 9th time of you trying to upload PHI to the tool, it wasn't going to work a 10th time. And why were they trying a 10th time? Because they didn't realize that what they were doing was against policy. So although we present the policy, we recognize not a lot of people read it. So we're looking at complementary controls. But I started this webinar with visibility. And visibility is so important to understand what people want to do. And we recognize that if we were to block, people would just go to their phones and start using it anyway. So we'd rather see what people are doing and try to either correct behavior or direct behavior than just assume that they're not behaving a certain way. And so we now have, your Palantirs and your Copilots and your DAXs for the various use cases that are adding a lot of value to the organization. And now we're trying to push people into those enterprise platforms where possible and educate them on the reasons why we want to standardize and not just go off and leverage Claude for something when we've got Copilot GitHub, or leverage some other tool where we've got, a standard Copilot using transcription when we've got DAX. And so we're now really focused on education and redirection.
Just a quick follow-up, Anahi. So you're sort of not blocking things in a sense. You're letting people use some things. I suppose that I would imagine there are some red lines there that people can't do, but in general, it's a permissive environment because you want to see what they're doing. And then it sounds like in a secondary level, you're trying to provide sanction tools that address some of the needs of what they're revealing by what they're using. And then there's that conversion process of perhaps gently redirecting, you mentioned, or at some point outright blocking and redirecting and saying, what you're trying to use, you can't use anymore, but we have a great alternative, and here's what it is, and we can get you coached up on this, right? So just take me through that. Do I have that understanding correctly of how that's kind of working?
That's pretty much how that works, right? If an end user wants to go to an AI site, we allow it through our cloud access security broker. However, there are certain sites like Warm GPT you can't get. But then through conditional access policies, the individuals are trying to do something with the technology that is not aligned with use cases that are allowed. An example is uploading sensitive information to the site. They get blocked and they get redirected to the policy, and we generally get a phone call from us on education. And that educational opportunity is generally what enables us to sort of softly redirect them to the sanctioned technology. Because in the time, they're not trying to be malicious. They're trying to just get their job done. And,
Right.
and the goal is at some point, once we really have these very robust enterprise capabilities, is to potentially whittle down the access pool to a little bit more restrictive. But I don't believe that our goal is to just go from allowing what we allow now to really being restrictive in what we will allow in the future.
Excellent. Very good. Antonio, I muted you and it won't let me unmute you. If you want to unmute yourself, Antonio,
I just did. Yeah.
It's okay. So what are your thoughts on what you're hearing?
No, I agree with Anna. I agree with both of the panelists, right? I mean, for us, we started with the policy, right? So, and then we quickly moved towards, hey, we've got to make some decisions around AI. So we need to address governance, right? So we started taking a look at really kind of our governance framework, our governance bodies, and we're in the process of really kind of retooling, rechartering all of our different governance bodies, right? Because they not only need to look at technology or govern technology in a traditional way, but AI brings some other factors that need to be considered, right? So, and there's a lot of dimensions through which we need to view AI or evaluate AI from an architectural perspective, security and privacy perspective, data governance perspective. So we had committees that were set up, prior to AI that would evaluate, new technologies in each of those dimensions, right? So, but we know that there's new factors you need to evaluate with AI. There are new decision rights that come along with the governance of AI, right? So, we started that process to really kind of revamp our governance, and then you started with an education kind of program, right? Both security awareness and specific communications around artificial intelligence and what was coming relative to AI security and AI governance. So our users were not surprised, right? When they attempt to access an AI and they see a banner prop up, right? They're not surprised by it, right? Because they knew that it was coming. They knew about, our desire to really kind of standardize on a specific artificial intelligence. So we encouraged them, beforehand, right? If you're using other AI apps to, reach out to us, right? So we created a mechanism by which they can reach out to us, tell us, what they were using, why they were using it, right? So we had all these use cases that they were applying specific AI applications to. It wasn't just a matter of us, really kind of scanning and seeing what AI was out there and trying to figure out who was using it, right? We did some of that, but we also encouraged the users to provide us with information around what AI application are using it, why they're using it, the specific use case, and details around it, so we could evaluate those details. So, and then it was beginning to discover, right? So we used the capabilities we had to discover what we had in the environment, right? Identifying what all of those AI applications were, and we even saw instances where people were using AI applications to send data outside of our environment, unsanctioned applications, right? So there was a particular instance where they were using an AI application that was very much like nuanced DAX, right? And they were sending data outside of our environment. So our biggest concern initially from a technology controls perspective was data leakage and data loss, right? So we needed visibility into what data was leaving the network and making sure that that data was not leaving in an unsanctioned way, and it wasn't sensitive data like PHI that was being transmitted outside of our network. As we were evaluating, our specific AI security and governance tooling needs, we needed to ensure that data wasn't leaving our environment, sensitive data wasn't leaving our environment. So we also set up a number of kind of data security controls as well, and DOP, to make sure that we were controlling data leaving our environment. So it was really a multi-pronged approach, really starting with the policy, starting with efforts to set up governance, setting up a communications and training program to get people aware of, kind of the threats and risks of, using AI, but also to make them aware of some of the things that we were initiating to make sure that we're establishing security and governance around AI, and then, beginning to receive feedback from the user community on what AI they were using, because we hadn't standardized yet. We hadn't, controlled what they can use and not use yet. And why they're using it, so we can begin to kind of evaluate those business cases and begin having discussions with them around how we could potentially provide a sanctioned method in lieu of the method they were already using or the AI application they were already using.
All right, very good, Antonio. Thank you.
You're
Rob,
welcome.
let's bring you in. Let's talk about tools and things like that. Obviously, your area of expertise. If you were advising a CISO today, um, what would you say in terms of what they need to be able to see, and what the tools out there will allow them to see?
Great question. Just following along with some of what everybody else has kind of mentioned. Visibility into what the data is happening, what people are up to with the applications. If you can gain that visibility, then you can, coach your users into, the right direction. Tool set, I'm fortunate to get to play with all the shiny new stuff right out of the gate. We help, beta test some of the stuff that we got that Netskope's building. So
Mhm.
we get to, have that visibility with, AI guardrails, the AI gateway, the AI, command center, all of those things give us a really good visible set of data to work with when we make those decisions to help guide the governance committee. We had an interesting, use case, the whole, yes, but instead of just saying no all the time, because most times people are just trying to get their job done. And, we have, of course, we're a worldwide company. We have employees that, that English is not their first language. So we had spotted, some usage of an AI technology that was not a sanctioned app, but they're just trying to rewrite some documents to make it better for more professional sounding. So we spot that through our visibility, reach out to the users, say, hey, we do have sanction tools for this. Check this out. Just back to coaching and education. And fortunately, our tool set helps us to put those guardrails in. Coach people back into sanctioned application to make sure we can control that data and keep our data as our data. So yeah.
All right, very good. Krista, let's come back to you. Um, this issue of vendors sort of slipping AI or implementing AI or releasing AI into your environment through an upgrade. Seems like quite difficult to manage. Uh, I don't know if every time an application is upgraded, it's a formal process. It can be slowed down and reviewed. I don't know how much the vendors are communicating what's in any new upgrade, and I don't know if they're going out of their way to flag, "Hey, there's AI in this. Make sure you take a good look at it." Have it go through a separate governance track at your organization. So you have the idea of shadow AI, which is maybe somebody purchasing a service on their credit card and using that to do things with data, and then you have vendors releasing upgrades in your environment. Um, what are your thoughts around managing sort of the vendor side?
Yeah, so we've done a couple different things so far, and there are some things I'd like to do. We always do an annual review on our most critical vendors. So we have the vendors tiered out, tier 0 through tier 4. And so obviously tier 0, tier 1, tier 2 vendors are going to receive the most scrutiny. So upon annual review, we absolutely interject, like, so new vendors obviously, and then the old kind of long-standing relationships. We have inserted the AI questions like Anahi has spoken about, to say like, "Hey, what are you using?" And then, digging down into how do you train your models, what happens with our data, like the whole 9 yards. But, you know, let's just say you have a vendor that is tier 0 where you don't wanna wait a year. We've actually developed really great relationships with a lot of our tier 0s as design partners and innovation partners where we have ongoing conversations about what they're doing. So I think it's really critical to understand what you're and this comes into resilience conversations that have been going on as well, and how resilience has changed in the mind of CISOs and businesses to understand truly what your most critical are. And by critical, like in healthcare, right? Patient care, like if we had to operate for, 120 days with one or two vendors, what would they be? So understanding your tiering and having those ongoing conversations. And frankly, for if we had the manpower for vendors, that are still tier 1 that maybe we haven't done that for, I'd love to have a more, common cadence. But really from that perspective, so we're redoing contracts, right, to add clauses. We've come up with an awesome insertion into our contracts and doing amendments for the ones, our most critical, design partners. But I I'd love to, and we're working on using our technology like everybody else is here to scan and say what is being used, and if it pops as something critical, maybe we need to look at that right away and do that out of cycle from a risk perspective. And so a lot of that, to everybody's point on here, comes back to governance and true risk assessment of, if a vendor incorporates AI, what is the risk to us as an organization?
All right, very good. Anne, what are your thoughts around vendor management in this area? Oh, you gotta come off mute. It's okay. It's all right.
Did it? I
There you
don't know.
go.
What's wrong with me today? I'm much better at this.
That's okay.
So I talked about visibility. So it's looking at a tool that can give us visibility into what's running on our network and in our SaaS platforms. And the reason I need a tool in this space is we have thousands of applications. To try and work individually with each one of those vendors would become unmanageable, and it would take us years. So being able to have that visibility for me is critical so that we can then reach out where we think we have high-risk areas and work individually with the vendors. Proactively, we have added language to our agreements. That does a couple of things that are important. Few things. One, it requires the vendors to provide us with notifications about when they're introducing AI into their environment and gives them specifications on the types of things that we expect for them to disclose to us. So kind of like a bill of materials, but for the AI specific technologies. In addition to that, we have a prohibition in our agreements that prohibits the vendors from utilizing our data to train their models. We've traditionally had a provision in our agreements that forbids the vendors from utilizing data for any reason beyond providing services to us. So this is just taking it to another level. And then we have a few provisions in the AI language that just protect us from what we believe to be some of the high-risk areas and requires a secure software development AI life cycle so that they are not introducing undue vulnerabilities into our environment. So we're tackling it both ways, gaining that visibility so that we can then build the capabilities to work individually with the vendors and then proactively adding contractual provisions to the agreements to hold them accountable and responsible for how we can both agree to leverage AI responsibly.
Very good, Rob. Any advice here for the our listeners who are dealing with this? Trying to manage the user base and what they're bringing in, perhaps shadow AI, and then trying to manage the vendor base. We did one of the articles that we did yesterday based on something that came out was from Class did a report, third-party risk management stalls after onboarding. So the point of the Class report was people are doing a pretty good job of getting vendors onboarded and doing some vetting there. But with the hundreds of vendors and all the different things that are happening with them, that's just completely unmanageable over time. So your advice in those areas?
Back to visibility, making sure you're partnering well with your we have an AI governance board within the company, so when we see new AI tools popping up in use, we get information over to them. They can pull dashboards out of the Netskope platform to see what all is actually taking place, and they can help get information back to the user base to say, hey, this is the direction we're going. Let's make sure that we're staying within the regulations that we need to. So there's just back visibility and coordination. A lot of good communication amongst the teams is really what's making it work for us.
Very good, Antonio. This third-party risk management is a big issue and has been an issue in and of itself. Now we add in this element of AI coming into your environment through upgrades, and no trigger causing any information to be given about that unless you proactively let your vendors know, I need to be notified when, and Anahi mentioned it, when you hit any of these guardrails, I need to know about it when it's coming in. So they can't at least plead ignorance going forward. They can't say, well, we didn't think we had to tell you. So your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I agree with the other panelists, right? I think there's a number of things that you can do. The third-party risk management, of course, via surveys, we gather information from our vendors relative to the private service they're providing and whether or not there's artificial intelligence included. in those products, right? And the nature that artificial intelligence. So we address that through our surveys. We have continuous monitoring capabilities that we're actually going to
Antonio, can you adjust your headset a little bit? You were just getting a little muffled there.
Okay.
Much better. Much better.
How about that?
Good. Good.
Okay. So, I was saying I agree with the panelists. I mean, there's a number of ways you can address this. Of course, the vendor contract route and the language within the vendor contracts, I think is really, really important. A lot of them brought up the point of, whether or not they're using our internal data to train the models, right? We want to make sure that that is not the case. And they're disclosing enough information about, the specific AIs included, so where we can begin the process of evaluating that AI through, those governance areas that I talked about. But there's also the third-party risk management aspect of it. And then some of the tools that we're trying to, stop to really analyze, the AI that's embedded in some of these third-party products, right? And to make sure that we are, providing adequate security and governance over those same. And, we're evaluating those tools through governance mechanisms, right? I think a big part is the architectural review of those AI components, right? So we go through a third-party review and more of a security review, but we also go through an architectural review. And that process is actually pretty intense. Right? You interrogate the vendor about the use of AI, how they're developing it, how they're training it, their evaluation of bias and trustworthiness of the AI. So it's really an essential process that we put together from an architectural review perspective to really kind of review that AI to make sure that it's we understand how it's developed, tested, and all that, and that it meets our specific requirements, right? And that we can overlay it to security controls. We can integrate it to whatever it needs to be integrated with. So the vendor contracting side, the third party risk side, and then just there's natural relationship with the vendor, right? We also do a tooling of our vendors based on business impact assessments, and especially for those strategic vendors, right? We always want to know what's on your roadmap, what things are you going to incorporate in your product suite. And whether or not there's AI included, and then understanding the nature of that AI, what it's going to do, how it's going to be incorporated in our environment, what it's going to integrate with, all that stuff.
All right, very good. Thank you for that. Krista, let's talk a little bit about. I'm hearing in everybody in other interviews and what everybody's saying. I'm hearing a very strong theme that we will not be the office of no, right? It's just it's like everyone got that message over the last 15 years in security. We will not be the office of no. It seems like the pendulum has really swung, and I hate to use the word permissive, but it's a little bit permissive. And I just wanted your thoughts. I mean, it definitely seems it's obviously the right way to go, but do you have any concerns that we could go too far in that direction?
I would say if your governance and risk management programs can't keep up, absolutely, we can be um, too permissive. And so the idea in healthcare, especially, is we are not going to survive as healthcare organizations if we don't embrace AI to help us, especially administratively. But think about from an imaging perspective, the things that AI catches already that the human eye misses. And so there's a significantly positive impact allowing agility. And so I know Anahi and I differ a little bit on our approaches, but part of what we're doing here so we can open up is making sure that our 7-layer approach is in place to allow permissiveness. So to your point, absolutely, right? Like we were so worried about patient data getting out that, the kingdom was locked down. But you can't, as a healthcare organization, be agile and remain at the head of the curve, especially with all the regulations coming down the reimbursement, financial impacts to us, it's not sustainable anymore. So really, having a robust governance program and technical controls will allow that agility. So am I nervous? Not really, but I come from I worked in crypto when it was still bleeding edge, and so I've seen, the regulation, can't keep up, and private industry pretty much regulates itself. So you see a lot of healthcare organizations coming up with their own frameworks, getting together with conglomerates, like Health Sector Coordinating Council and HISAC, and putting out governance specifically for us because we understand, um, the obstacles we're up against. And so I think, to answer your question concisely, if we don't have the proper governance and monitoring and visibility, it is very easy to be overly permissive and be lax. And so from a visibility perspective, why that's so important and why everybody on this call is harping on that, it allows us to shift. So maybe we're spending resources in one area of our security program, and then we see an uptick in risk near real time or even weekly, bi-weekly, depending on how closely we monitor with our integrated risk platforms. We see an uptick in another area, it allows us to easily shift and then reduce that risk back down so the business can remain agile and remain open with being able to adopt it. And so I know I didn't get into it very deeply, but I am presenting on this next week. We have a 7-layer model whole framework that we came up with the AI gateway and control plane, the identity layer with non-human, application and model layer with LLMs and agent guardrails, secure API calls, tools, tool and action layers with tool mediation, policy validation, controlled execution, PAII protection, RAG security, data classification, the data layer, monitoring and control, SIM-SOC observability and drift detection, in layer 6 and layer 7 to human oversight and response with a human in the loop, kill switches, and rollback for resilience. So I think if you have have the support to develop a kind of evenly distributed security model, you can absolutely allow that and allow it with confidence so you can sleep at night.
Yeah, Rob, it's very interesting. Visibility seems to be the key. Now, you can be, permissiveness is, I guess, okay if it's a choice, right? We see what's going on, and we're allowing certain things to continue, and we're going to try and create sanction tools, and we're going to try and port people over. But if we have visibility, we can make those decisions. If you don't have visibility, you're not being permissive, you're blind. And that's permissive, not by choice. And that's probably a really, really bad place to be. So, I mean, to what degree do you think is that going on out there? To what degree are health systems blind?
That's a great question. We want to make sure that we have the for us when we deploy our tool sets. Of course, we have the client. We have we can have IPsec tunnels up to try to make sure that we see all of that different traffic. So for us, the way we operate for Netskope, we do have tunnels up between offices, and we do have the client deployed on all of our workstations, which is a great advance from where we used to be, right? Because startup company was a little bit of a wild west, so a lot of that permissiveness, because we didn't want to stifle innovation, but a lot of that, just like you said, it was because we were blind to it. So we've definitely matured. We've been able to gain that visibility where we can actually put those guardrails in place because, like I said, a little bit of maturity, making sure that we get those wrappers around everything where we need to have that. So I heard talking about making sure we're able to monitor those SaaS applications. We do have that visibility now, and when you're just trying to make sure that you're guiding your folks in the right direction. The coaching capability that our tool gives us really helps us to get the users on board as taking responsibility as being part of the solution instead of like just the old like you had mentioned we're not no anymore. Well, we want to partner with our users to get them going in the right direction, using the right tools, and just trying to make sure that we have self-reported incidents from users. Yeah, our tools might have seen it, but the users coming to us saying, "Hey, this just happened." And so by making sure that they feel like they're part of the solution, we're doing this together. It's been a good game changer for us.
Very good. Anahi, let's talk a little bit about the idea that you need cooperation from your user base in order to be an effective security practitioner. And that probably involves a lot of education about why you want them to use certain tools, not do certain things, what's available, understanding apples to apples, meaning people may not even realize, Antonio talked about Copilot. People may not even realize that the tool they want to use, well, we offer something that does the same thing. They may not realize we have similar functionality. We've already sanctioned for you. And here's why you want to use what we have because of security breaches. And then we get a ransomware, and then you can't use your tools, and then we got to divert patients. And there's a whole getting your user base on board that security has always done and maybe even needs to do more so around AI, and that involves you working with the either marketing or the chief medical officer, and that involves all that getting out of the office, right, and being out there among the user base. So, what are your thoughts there?
So, as we were answering the previous question, one word kept coming up in my head: culture, 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 culture. And it really does come down to culture. I have the benefit of 11-year tenure at ChristianaCare. So I have been able to, through longevity, build the relationships that are really needed to shift the culture. And so education for us is a huge piece of what we do in information security. But I think another thing that has worked really well for us is we have a pretty mature third-party risk management program that's independent of AI. It's been around for years, and it has enabled us to talk with leaders across the organization around risk in a way that they understand. Right? We don't talk about cybersecurity risk for the sake of cybersecurity risk. We talk about the potential risks that a particular piece of technology might present to the organization or to the individual, given its potential failures or the potential means to exploit it. And so they're used to having these conversations. And so when we created the AI governance committee that is comprised not just of security, but there's privacy, there's compliance, there's legal, there's clinical informatics, there's finance, there are others that we are introducing into this governance committee. They understand how to have these conversations because they've experienced it. So we didn't have to start from the ground up. There was already a framework around third-party risk management that could be easily transported into something that was AI specific. And so that starts with leadership, but it's a top-down approach that has worked really well. And now we can have those conversations with anybody in the organization. I mentioned that our team calls up people that are doing things that are getting blocked because it's against policy. And those are easy conversations to have because they're not punitive. It's not security calling the end user because the end user did something wrong. It's security calling the end user to say, we see that you're trying to do something and it's being blocked. What are you trying to do? Why? How can we help you? And if we can take that approach and repeat it in the way that we've done traditionally in cybersecurity and just transport it to AI, the culture remains the same, and the adoption in what I mean adoption, the adoption in doing the things that are sanctioned and using the tools that are sanctioned by ChristianaCare are much easier conversations to have. And so for me, culture and education are really powerful tools in being successful in this space.
Yeah, very good. Antonio makes me think of the word shepherding. My wife, when we talk about trying to raise our children, especially the teenagers, she uses the word shepherding. We got to kind of shepherd as opposed to yelling and screaming and all that kind of thing. So that sounds like what we want to do with our user base. We want to slowly, gently, we want to shepherd them into safe spaces where they can practice the care that they want to practice. Um, and not be punitive and not scare them, but also protect the organization so they can continue to use the tools that they need because they don't know how to practice very well without them. And that's a whole nother webinar about business continuity and resilience planning, which is also off the charts in terms of interest and activity right now. So there's so much going on. But your thoughts around sort of shepherding educating the user base?
No, I think shepherding and educating the user base is critical, right? I always talk in terms of, the time, security, security IT, right? What is the security IQ of our organization? Because I think that dictates how successful security is going to be, right? And I always talk in terms of partnership, right? So it's, security is a team skill. So we need to help for the rest of the organization to make sure that we're keeping our enterprise as secure as possible. We don't want to be the department of no. We want to be the department of letting you know the value
I
and
like
risk,
that. I like that.
associated with artificial intelligence, right? And those risk-based discussions are critical, right? To coming to an understanding of what's going to be allowable, what's not going to be allowable, right? In terms of the organization's risk tolerance, right? Why are we implementing certain controls? It's to mitigate risks, right? And but that's going to be an organization decision, right? We have a risk committee. At the board level, we have, governance bodies that also evaluate risk below that level, right? So these become risk-based discussions, right? Is this risk acceptable, right? Are there ways to mitigate it, right? Do you need to put certain controls in place, right? And how is that going to limit or not limit, our users' ability to perform their jobs, right? And, if it does limit, right, is that acceptable, right? I mean, is it, does that, um, was that how does it compare to the risk? Is it allocated risk, right? Usually the kind of discussion we're having, especially now around artificial intelligence, right? We are evaluating, not only the use case that AI is being applied to, but the potential risk to the organization of exercising that use case using that AI capability. So um, now I think that risk processes are evolving. And now AI is a serious consideration. But I think the communications, the training, getting people up to speed, getting people smart on AI, what it is, how it's used, and what risk can it introduce to the organization is critical. It's critical. AI brings on a culture change, right? And we have to make sure that we are managing that change effectively and minimizing the risk to the organization.
That's great stuff. We don't want to be the department of no. We want to be the department of letting you know. I like that.
Right.
That's very good.
Yes.
All right, we have time for a final thought from everyone. So your best piece of advice to someone in your position at another organization, a comparable organization. Um, what is your Krista? Sounds like you're doing a lot of stuff. You got your presentation coming up. That sounds like a hot ticket for certain folks, right? Not the general public, but for certain folks, that's a hot ticket. So we'll go around the horn. And your best piece of advice for your colleagues, Krista?
I don't know, the general public needs to get on the train of getting excited about security. It would be my recommendation.
Yeah, what are the tickets going for in the secondary market on that one?
$0 and 0 cents. Free 99 is the right price for me.
All right.
Um,
Well, this panel would try and get in. Go ahead.
we would.
Yeah.
I would just say, truthfully, our biggest proponent has been proactive upskilling on behalf of our team. So, like, all of this is going to take time, and leadership is working out governance. And I know, like, everybody expressed, especially, like, it's a big cultural shift, and leadership can't always drive that. It needs to be driven partially from the top and partially from the bottom. And somehow security is always sandwiched in the middle, driving both. Is really encourage your team and get them excited to upskill. Anahi said a couple weeks ago on a call together that she's gamifying some of this stuff and improvements for her team. So I really think if you empower people to upskill and understand what they're up against, your program's going to move faster anyway, and you're going to have more support.
Excellent. Thank you. Ani?
Well, she teed up the gamifying concept. Might as well just go with that one, which is, we want our team, we can't protect what we don't know. And so the whole concept of upskilling and making sure that we are using AI in our own daily lives so that we can understand how it works and how to protect it is really important. And so we've created an AI challenge for my team where each individual has been encouraged to come up with a really cool AI use case that delivers value to the information security team or program and to present it to the team. And then we will judge and come up with either a winner or a category of winners where we can celebrate their accomplishment. And it's just a way, people are competitive and my team isn't any different. And so if we can create a little bit of fun and a little bit of competition and a reward at the end, then we're adopting AI without knowing we're adopting AI.
Love it. Beautiful. Thank you. Antonio? I got you. I put you on mute, buddy. You want to take yourself off mute? That was me.
Yeah, I
Go
just
ahead.
took myself off
Go
mute,
ahead.
right? One thing we're doing, and because the skills gap and the need to upskill and become aware and knowledgeable about, artificial intelligence and, all the threats it presents, but, more importantly, from a security perspective, how we can use artificial intelligence to enable some of the things we find to do around threat detection and response, around, data protection, all of the different use cases that, we can use, AI to be better at. Like, AI is really good at sorting through the noise and, the signals that you get from all of our tools and making sense of it all and giving us an actionable insight that we can occupy. But the upskilling, investing in people and giving them up to speed on how to say intelligence. Really, kind of, so we're leveraging our vendors, we're leveraging training organizations, we're leveraging whatever resource we can to get our people up to speed and to dedicate the time to allow them to get up to speed on artificial intelligence. We have a lot going on here in the midst of a pretty broad transformation of our security program in all areas, from ERP to identity and asset management to security operations. But there is a need to get our people up to speed and out on, aspects of artificial intelligence, how to safeguard against, threat, especially with artificial intelligence, how to use it, to saying our jobs better, more efficiently on a day-to-day basis. I love the idea of the challenge, right? The AI challenge, right? And I'd love to learn more about that. I make up an afternoon for the rest of you and nice.
It's Anahi. Yeah, feel free to reach out to me afterwards.
Yes, I would love to learn more about that. I think that is a fantastic idea. And, really, using competition like that, I think, kind of inspires people and incentivizes them, to go trying to learn more about artificial intelligence. But yeah, the investment in people, and it's not just in security, but, the broader organization. So in terms of security training and communications and awareness of all things AI, right, on an ongoing basis, right? I think that's helpful. We're using some of our, communication mechanisms to do that. We're using newsletters. We're using, our internal sites. We've got a broad communications program, designed to increase the knowledge of our users in artificial intelligence. And some of them, the most they know is, about ChatGPT or Copilot, and really kind of basic ways of using those tools, right? They don't understand necessarily the broader context of artificial intelligence and how it works. So, getting them up to speed, I think, is important. So, to really kind of, manage that cultural challenge as opposed to letting that cultural challenge evolve and already get something unmanageable.
All right. Very good, Antonio. Thank you. Rob, we're going to give you the last word. What's your best piece of advice for our listeners?
I'd piggyback with a couple of other panelists on here. We're currently doing a Hack-AI-Thon, which is encouraging all of our team members to upskill by leveraging any of the number of AI products that we've already sanctioned for use, and trying to come up with some new use cases solving different. And sorry for the extra background noise here.
That's okay. Go ahead.
So, but just the competitive, the team building that we get out of it, it just continues to build the culture and really helps out with everything, with the skills coming along, and you get to let people do it, and you can see some amazing creativity folks come up with.
All right. Excellent, Rob. Thank you. Well, that's about all we had time for today. Regarding continuing education, you could use the link I sent out in the chat box to download a certificate of attendance. There are also links to today's sponsor, Netskope, and some other health system CIO resources. I want to thank our panelists for spending some of their valuable time with us today, Netskope for making the event possible, and you for attending. And with that, everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you.